For centuries, the story of slavery has been told through the lens of the transatlantic trade, while another vast tragedy remains largely unspoken. For more than 1,300 years, the Arab-Muslim slave trade abducted millions of Africans. Men were castrated, women were exploited, entire communities were drained of life. Scholars have described it as a veiled genocide, not because it was hidden, but because history chose not to look. From Zanzibar, the trade's beating heart, human beings were sold alongside clothes and ivory. Captured from regions stretching from Sudan to Ethiopia to Somalia, Africans were forced across the Indian Ocean to labor in plantations throughout the Persian Gulf and Arabian Peninsula. Across the Sahara, caravans carried enslaved West Africans toward the Maghreb and the Nile Basin. Hunger, disease, thirst, and exhaustion killed as many as half of those taken before they ever reached the market. Unlike European traders who primarily sought labor, many Arab merchants pursued a different and devastating objective. Women and girls were highly prized for concubinage, sold as sex slaves and often commanding twice the price of men. Their bodies became commodities, their lives reduced to ownership and control. For men, the fate was no less brutal. Castration was widespread, producing eunuchs deemed safe for servitude. Many died from the procedure. Those who survived were denied lineage, family, and future, an assault not just on individuals, but on generations. While Europe and the United States eventually moved, however imperfectly, toward abolishing slavery, the practice persisted in parts of the Arab world, in some cases continuing covertly into the 20th century. This system outlived empires. Slavery was only officially abolished in places like Saudi Arabia and Yemen in 1962, Oman in 1970, and Mauritania in 1981. The damage went far beyond individual suffering. This trade fractured African societies, disrupting families, distorting population growth, and hollowing out local economies. Its effects were not temporary, they reshaped communities in ways that still echo today. The Arab-Muslim slave trade, also known as the Trans-Saharan or Eastern slave trade, is recognized as the longest in history. To many scholars, it was referred to as a veiled genocide because of the extreme humiliation and near-death experiences that the enslaved endured. The Arabs raided sub-Saharan Africa for 13 centuries without interruption. According to a book by a Franco-Senegalese, translated in English as The Veiled Genocide, millions of male slaves who were deported disappeared as a result of the inhuman treatment. Enterprising Arab merchants and middlemen would converge at Zanzibar, where they acquire raw materials like clothes and ivory. They would then buy enslaved black Africans, who were forced to carry those goods and labor on plantations abroad. Numerous slaves from Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan were brought to the Zanzibar market and in turn shipped across the Indian Ocean to the Persian Gulf and Arabian Peninsula, where they are forced to work in places like Oman, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. The Arab merchants also captured women and girls to serve as sex slaves in harems. The desire for female slaves was so high that merchants would often double their price. The male slaves were selected to work in the fields and to guard the harems. In order to prevent reproduction, the slaves were castrated, a brutal process that led to the death of many. Sometimes slaves were castrated after purchase in North African slave markets. Some black slaves served in the military forces of North Africa. For instance, the Zirid dynasty used black slaves imported from Sudan. In the Muslim culture of the Middle Ages, blackness was synonymous with slavery. Despite the orthodox Muslim jurist position that no Muslim, regardless of race, could be enslaved, black Muslims were legally held as slaves in Al-Andalus, in medieval Iberia under Islamic control. It is worthy to note that slaves were marched in shackles from across the Sahara through the trans-Saharan slave trade to the Nile. Many died from exposure and swollen feet. While the Arab slave trade has been officially abolished in most Arab countries, the human trafficking still continues in modern-day era. For example, in Libya, vulnerable migrants are illegally traded, exploited, and forced into labor or sexual slavery by traffickers and militias. The primary victims are migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, which includes Niger, Nigeria, Ghana, and Eritrea. These migrants travel through Libya hoping to reach Europe. They are often held in brutal, overcrowded detention centers or informal camps managed by armed groups. Those who cannot pay ransoms for their release are sold in makeshift slave markets. Migrants who have gone through Libyan detention centers have shown signs of many human rights abuses, such as severe abuse, including electric shocks, burns, lash, and even skinning. Videos of migrants sold to slavery are beginning to circulate on social media. That is not ancient history, that is yesterday. If we remember one slave trade, we must remember them all. History is not just what is taught, it is what survives being silenced,